Well, now that you've given some thought to the design of your direct examination, let's talk about formatting the direct questions themselves. Now, this is not as easy as it may strike you, and is the source of a lot of surprise objections during your first examination. Now, a direct question must be open ended. It must seek a singular piece of information and not be a compound question. It must be clear and easy to understand and not be vague, and it must not be a leading question, which is to say, it must not convey to the witness the answer that you are seeking. So the best way to, and this is a strong recommendation, but the best way to form a direct question is to write it so that it begins with who, what, where, why, how, when, or tell us more about, or explain to me. These sorts of questions are generally not leading questions. They're asking who, what, where, how, and why. It's difficult to ask a leading question when you begin with one of these words, though it can be done. Be very careful that you do not suggest the answer that you are seeking when you write these questions. It's important that you not write compound questions. Each direct examination question must seek a single piece of information. Well, here's an example of a compound question. Tell us more about what happened the next morning and what your neighbor said to you. You'll hear objection, compound question. Well, say you're happy to rephrase the question and break it down to its components. All right. Tell us more about what happened the next morning. Let the witness answer. Then you can follow up with another component of the question. Tell us what your neighbor said to you. Well, that may draw a hearsay objection, and we'll talk about hearsay objections later on in this series. Another tip, when you're writing direct examination questions, avoid conversational grammar that can really trip you up. For instance, how about this question? Isn't it true that the sun rises in the west? You expect the answer, and you would expect this in normal conversation, that the answer is no, it rises in the east. But the exact correct answer to that question is yes, it is not true. So, isn't it true that the sun rises in the west? Yes, it is not true. So don't get tripped up. Use precision, use simple language. Don't use a lot of contractions that might be used against you. Also, avoid double negatives, using an expression in a question like something was, how expensive was something? Wasn't it not insignificant? A double negative is a little bit confusing. It may draw an objection, and an arbitrator may affirm an objection made when there are double negatives being built into the questions. The questions offered on direct examination in the ABA arbitration tournament are rarely as precise as they could be. Way too often, law students fall back into sort of less formal ways of thinking about this question and answer exchange with a witness. They write questions that are sloppy or conversational, they're vague, they're ambiguous, they're compound, they're misleading, or they will draw objections for all these reasons. So make an effort to be precise in formatting your direct examination questions. Well, here's an important tip. This is something that all law students fall into, and that is that they practice asking questions for the direct examination, and when the witness offers the answer, the student says, okay, or uh-huh, or right, and moves on to the next question. It's natural in our conversation that we will confirm what the answer to a question, and it's quite natural for students to unconsciously confirm the answers they're receiving from a witness. You've got to be aware of this. It is perfectly natural in conversation. It has no place in the direct examination in an arbitration or in a court of law. I've seen so many questions in competition that are vague and that students rarely spot it, and it's actually rarely the source of objections. Here's an example of a vague question. What did you hear about a damaging storm that hit the town in January? Well, this is vague because it doesn't specify a source of the information, nor the time in which the knowledge was learned. In this particular case, it was important when the witness learned of storm damage to the area. So when you're formatting questions for your direct examination, remember, use the who, what, where, when, how, tell us more, explain to us more, open-ended questions, avoid leading questions, avoid compound questions, be precise, don't be sloppy, and certainly don't be conversational in your exchange with the witness. We'll spend a lot more time on direct examination questions, objections to those questions, and how to handle objections. But for now, work carefully with your teammates to write a series of questions that are bulletproof and that will not draw objections.